The idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages, because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I've come to Cley next the sea on the North Norfolk coast. 24 miles north of Norwich, the village looks out onto marshland on England's east coast. A quiet village now, this was once a cosmopolitan home to Flemish immigrants.
They left a lasting legacy in the architecture. You can see it.
Absolutely.
Ancient graffiti is showing who were leaving their marks in the church.
A particularly lovely example just in here.
Yeah, amazing.
And I'll find out why this village is no longer quite as next the sea as it once was.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea.
My skipper is Nick Stokes. He's been navigating the Norfolk coast for many years, and today we're in a traditional lobster boat.
Oh, look at that. It's just beautiful to see that sail up, isn't it?
And these red sails, there's just something about them. They just fit this environment.
Out there is the North Sea, Belgium, Holland, Scandinavia, Germany, and now we're coming down this narrow, winding channel to the village of Cley. And there it is, my first glimpse of it. The windmill there, proudly looking out over the marsh. And the houses all cluster. The shoreline here, they're just high and dry enough to be above the marsh, above the wetland. It's really distinctive architecture I can start to see. And I just love the colours in this part of the world. This is a really beautiful landscape, and it's a landscape that's gone through extraordinary changes over time.
The name Cley comes from the Old English name Cley, meaning the place with the clayey soil, as recorded in the Domesday Survey. Today this village is nearly a mile from the shoreline, but back in the 1200s it was one of 3 ports that made up a major shipping area.
In medieval times, and for some time afterwards, Norfolk, the East Anglian coast, was where our main trade with northwest Europe took place, goods flowing in and out from across the sea. And Norwich was England's second city after London. Now, the documents indicate how important Cley was as a port, how busy it was, but so too do the buildings. Oh, look at this. A medieval arch made of limestone facing out onto the quay. I'm not convinced it's in its original position. It looks like it's been reset in a later building, but it's an indication of the medieval importance of the place. Oh, look at this, the old customs house. Looks 18th century on the facade here, but possibly an earlier core. Look at those dentiled eaves, that projecting brickwork. Parts of this village have a very urban feel, tightly packed buildings, narrow alleyways, because this was one of the busiest ports in the whole of England. Ships of over 130 tons would offload their cargoes at the quayside.
A really good clue to how well it was thriving is the size of its church.
Whoa, well, this is some parish church. I can see the core of the building there is done in the decorated style in the 14th century. And then it's been extended in the 15th century. All this perpendicular work, these straight lines, these very large windows. And the quality of the workmanship is fantastic. You see these panels here with the knapped flint blocks in them, highly decorative. Think of the work that's going into this place. Think of the expense. This church is growing as money is flowing into it from patrons, from revenue that's being generated. It's all going into this great expression of wealth and piety.
Archaeologist Matt Champion has been studying what the inside of the church tells us about the locals who worshipped here.
Well, there's some architectural treasures on the outside of this church, but you're looking for stuff that wasn't created by masons, but by the locals.
Absolutely, Ben. What I've been doing in Cley Church is looking at the historical graffiti inscriptions that were left here by generations of parishioners, dating back to the Middle Ages.
And what's it telling you about their spiritual life here?
Well, a lot of the markings are just another form of prayer, if you like, and these are designed to ward off all forms of evil. A particularly lovely example just in here. What we think is happening is that these are being made with shears, and if you look at the manuscript evidence, they seem to be commonly shown on women. Are we looking at women leaving these markings, in particular around the font, to protect their newborn infant?
Squeeze around here. Oh!
So this is what we would call a cog, and it's absolutely typical of the sort of trading vessel that would have been operating throughout most of the Middle Ages. So we've got a single central mast running up here, and then all of our rigging lines are running to the rear.
So this could be a mariner coming in here and making this dedication. This is my ship. Please look after me because I'm going back across the North Sea.
Or it could be a member of their family. What you have to remember in a coastal community like Cley is that almost every family here has a direct connection to the sea. So these are essentially a prayer made solid in stone.
Yeah, amazing.
Just outside St Margaret's Church is the village green, but during the medieval period, this would have been Cley's original harbour.
Well, I've got some images here that are going to help me read this landscape. And the first thing I've got is a LiDAR image.
Using lasers, LiDAR technology allows us to see the lie of the land in great detail.
What it's showing is this wide floodplain of the river here. There's the present river, Glaven, running through there. And just here, near Cley Church, is this inlet. And I can start to see this was all part of that watery system, an ideal place to bring boats in. And I'm just starting to get these images of great ships sailing down here or being towed down here, offloading their cargoes from the continent. There's another image here that's even more evocative. It's a map of 1586, and I can see ships under sail here coming down the main channel from the sea. There's an inlet, and this inlet is clustered with houses near the church.
In 1612, a devastating fire burned down most of the medieval buildings in Cley. It's recorded that 117 houses were destroyed. Only the church and one or two other buildings remained. I'm trying to find one of them.
Oh, here we are, I'm in the right place, Newgate Farm. So this is the farmhouse. And very handily, there's a date up there on the gable. It says 1680, I think that's a 5. Oh, but hold on, wait a minute. You see there behind those roses, that straight line of brickwork? Those are coins, the corner of a building, the end of a building. But the date I was looking at was on that gable end, 1680s. So the building has been extended. This is in effect a new build of the 1680s. The earlier building was here. The question is, how much earlier?
Dr. Andrew Chapman has owned Newgate Farmhouse for 38 years, and he's invited me to try and find out if his home could predate the Great Fire.
Oh my goodness. Oh, and even more. And this is just extraordinary, isn't it? But the dates are interesting. I'm not sure people had access to this size of timber in the 1680s. They're starting to having to economise with building timber then, because it's just running out of massive oak like this.
Yes, we've always thought that this house was built in 2 bits. That bit in later in 1685 and this bit earlier, but we don't know exactly when. And then there's the issue of whether it survived the fire.
Well, I think this could be up to 100 years earlier,
Right.
Certainly decades earlier than that. And it could well be that perhaps some of the house survived the fire. Is there anything else I should see that might give a clue about how old this house is?
We've got a well outside.
I can't resist having a look down a well.
Right, this way, let's see what we can find. Right, there we go. You ready?
Sure about this?
Yep.
Ooh! Oh my goodness. So let's extend the pole and see how deep we can get.
It's got to be 30 feet down there, hasn't
Oh,
it?
it's miles down there. It's a bit like underwater archaeology, this, isn't it? Murky image. It's huge. So this is a large household, or several households, and there's 2 hand pumps in it. I mean, originally it had probably just been ropes and a bucket. It's clearly been used for some considerable time. But what's the size? It's cobbles, isn't it?
Definitely cobbles.
It's not brick, it's not cut stone, it's cobbles. And that is a bit problematic for dating it, because people have used flint cobbles for lining and building things for centuries.
Yeah.
But I think we can safely say those timbers in your house are older than 1685. I would suggest that this house, or part of it, was here before the fire.
Yeah, and perhaps damaged by it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trade was booming in Norfolk in the 1600s. Its ports brought in goods such as fish, spices and coal, and exported barley, oats and malt. And those trade links across the North Sea created opportunities for new settlers. Between 1565 and 1620, around 4,000 people of Dutch and French descent were living in Norwich alone. Thousands arrived and became known as the Strangers. They settled here, and their influence can be seen all over Norfolk. British historian Dr. Onyeka Nubia has studied the impact of immigration on medieval and Tudor Britain.
So who were these strangers that came in the 16th century?
In the 16th century, Western Europe went through a lot of turmoil, which meant that Christianity split effectively into two camps. Now, these two groups were at war with each other, but the Catholics were in the majority in most parts of Western Europe. And Protestants were often persecuted, and there was a feeling because Elizabeth I was a Protestant monarch, they would be safe here. This was the place that they came into England, and they settled and they changed the demographics of England.
And what skills did they bring with them?
So these are weavers, merchants, traders. They also brought with them the canary.
And I love the fact that just down the road we've got Norwich City Football Club.
Yes.
And their nickname is the Canaries.
Yeah.
And that's after the Flemish weavers that brought these little birds with them to amuse them while they were working.
And they brought, most importantly, beer.
Well, we had ale.
That's right,
and
that's
there's
right.
one important ingredient that's in beer that's not in ale.
And what's that, Ben?
Hops.
Absolutely.
So that sort of continental flavour of what we call beer now, we didn't have that before this period.
That's right.
And they left a lasting legacy in the architecture. You can see it here.
Absolutely. They lived in these houses around here. So this was a popular and an important mercantile town.
Now, this is a landscape that would have been very familiar to anyone coming across from the Netherlands. It's flat, low-lying, watery. There's even a windmill here, just like the drainage mills and the wind pumps right across Holland. But there's even stronger evidence for ties with the Netherlands over in the village. Oh yes, this is a prime example of what I was talking about. Brick comes in as early as possible here, just like in the Netherlands. And the method of construction is called Flemish bond. The clue's in the name. It's a stretcher, a header, a stretcher, a header, forming that distinctive pattern there. Now, as we look up to the gable end, it's very distinctive, curving gable end, all those curls. That's a Dutch or Flemish gable. And when you look at this building, you could be looking at a building in Ghent or Bruges or Amsterdam. And there are dozens of examples of this type of architecture all the way through the village. In the early 1600s, England was facing the prospect of a revolution, but also its ambitions were extending, its population was growing. The king and landowners wanted to make as much as possible from the productive land they had, not only to feed people, but to increase revenue. Now, here in Norfolk, it was a key growing area. And they began to look at this land, this marshland, this wasteland, as they saw it, and think, could we turn this into good grazing land, good growing land? They had the idea, they had the ambition, but they didn't necessarily have the know-how.
In the 1600s, Dutch settlers brought with them crucial new expertise. The technology of land reclamation, turning marshland into land to grow crops and graze cattle. Local historian Jonathan Hooton has studied land reclamation in Cley and the surrounding areas and its impact on the landscape.
So a landowner might have an ambition to improve the land they've got on these salt marshes, but having an ambition and actually doing it are two different things. They didn't necessarily have the skills.
No, so they brought in the Dutch, who were very skilled at doing it. They'd had a lot of practice on their very flat, low-lying land.
So you've got these superstar Dutch engineers and you set them to work, you give them a task. How do we drain this land and improve it for ourselves?
Well, in 1637, this bank here was thrown across the River Glaven for the local landowner, Sir Henry Calthorpe, to reclaim and turn into freshwater farmland. Now, once that was cut off, with the bank being built across, the channel started to silt up, and it spelt the end for Cley as a port.
Yeah. Now, they're trying to improve the landscape, but they've only improved it in one way, which is grazing and crops. They've destroyed another aspect of the economy here.
Yes, they improved it for the farm owners, but not for the merchants.
One Dutch engineer who brought his land reclamation skills here was Jan van Hassadonk. No pictures survive of him, but it's rumoured that he lived here.
Well, come into the drawing room.
Oh my goodness.
Pam Keyes and her family have owned Old Hall since 1988.
Huge fireplace here, Pam.
Yes, that's the oldest part of the house, and it's said to be there from the 1400s.
Yeah, well, it all looks 15th, 16th, 17th century. Just incredible. And what's this?
Pull it out and find out.
Ah, a clay pipe. Look at that. Oh, and a near complete one as well.
We found it when we came in, and that's its own cubbyhole.
I tell you what, being in a room like this, you can think yourself back to the scenes that would have taken place here. You know, your Dutch engineer, all the local bigwigs coming in to see what his plans are for the area. Yes, we'll put a bank along here and we'll drain those fields there and blah, blah. Because you wouldn't put your Dutch engineer up in a little fisherman's cottage. He's going to be in a place like this. Yeah, better put this away. It's going in my head.
I will make quite sure that it's there when you've gone.
And you've had archaeologists here before, I'll bet. And what's this here?
Well, it's part of a ship that was beached. It was a collier, and it was called the Grasstier.
This was the tiller. This was where the helm attached to the rudder, and the helm would actually steer the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes a great handrail. And it's a reminder of the maritime past of this place as well. The embankment that was built here to reclaim marshland had a devastating effect on the village. It accelerated the silting of the channel here, and it made it very difficult for boats to come in. Well, the villagers petitioned the king, and an admiral's court was called in 1638. Amazingly, the villagers won that case, and Calthorpe's embankment had to be taken down. Despite the ruling, embankments were permitted to the east and west, which in turn increased the silting of the channel here. Fast forward 200 years, and there's an even greater need to feed an expanding population. Reclamation comes back on the agenda. So in 1822, a new embankment is built here, and that one is the final nail in the coffin for the port of Cley. But the villagers have begun the fight back. Simon Reed is chairman of the Cley Harbour Committee, and since 2020, he's been heading up efforts to connect the village to the sea once again. So, quite a daunting task at the start. How did you go about getting this going?
It was the parish council first kicked it off. They had just got the permissions they needed to do an initial dredge, but they were having trouble getting the funding, so I suggested we have some working parties. 40 people turned up, and I thought, ooh, people are interested in this. And we cleared old jetties, broken boats, and prepared the area. And a friend made a suggestion to me that we start a pledge fund. We raised enough within about the first 4 months to do the initial dredge.
And a lot of work. I mean, big mechanical excavators coming here on the banks, scooping out all this silt and mud from the channel to open it up again.
Effectively, yes. The bank sides had just collapsed. The river was in a bad state, generally.
Yeah. It's opened up a whole world of opportunity, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Boats can get up here, sailing boats particularly. You'll see people walking out of their houses at 5 o'clock in the morning because they've got to catch the tide. Yeah. And people wheeling their canoes down the high street. You know, people swim in the harbour. It's really become alive, and people now recognise they've got their harbour back.
The village of Cley next the sea was shaped by trade opportunities, culture and ideas exchanged between peoples either side of the North Sea, but connected by that sea as neighbours. The architecture, the drainage engineering that was brought here had a profound effect on the village and on the surrounding landscape. Well, today, villagers are renewing their link to the sea, and in doing so, they're not only reconnecting Cley with its maritime past, but contributing to its future.